وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر وأولئك هم المفلحون. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'jil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Before we begin the exact points of our discussion, there are some points that inshallah throughout the nights, if we have the opportunity, we'll discuss of how to further extract the benefits of these majalis. One of the important elements that Amir al-Mu'mineen explained in his wasiyah is he says, do not raise your child the way you were raised. Recognize that they are born for a different time. When it comes to this majlis and the establishment of this majlis, those who came from Muslim lands, the majlis is one of the cornerstones of the culture and the life and the society you grow up in. And as a consequence, the exposure to Islam happens in many places. In family and friends' houses, on the streets, in the markets, everywhere is Islam. And one of the elements of that Islam is this majlis and this Hussainiyah. But here in this country, this is the only touch point of Islam that many of our children experience. Meaning throughout the day, when they go to school, when they go out in society, they're not exposed to Islam. They're not Muslims. John, Bob, George, Annette, I can't think of any other girl names at the moment. They're not Muslim. Your child isn't seeing Islam. He's seeing other faiths and identities and ideologies. And that's during this majlis, your child sees and learns about Islam. And that's it. What that means is that this majlis becomes incredibly important, becomes really significant to the development of the identity and character of your child to ensure that they remain a Muslim. So therefore, we have to treat our children in these majlises differently than the way our parents treated us. We have to behave with children in a very particular manner to ensure that the maximum impact, the maximum akhlaq, culture, tarbiyah is established through this majlis. Which is why bringing them here, and especially now that it's summertime, it's easy. But even in the winter time, even in school time, one of the concerns we have, it gets very late, the child has school, they have homework, they have responsibilities. But remember something. You want your child to succeed at school, but not at the cost of his Islam. You have to implement and teach and ensure that this fundamental stays in their faith and their identity. If you teach them that school is more important than Islam, sports are more important than in Islam, for example, if you have a Saturday school and on Saturdays there's the option of going to a game or it's the option to come to madrasa, to come to the school, your child will build the identity that things are more important than being a Muslim, and I'm a Muslim when it's convenient, and if it's inconvenient, then I do what I want. To teach them that Islam is important, we have to lead by example by making sure that this becomes the priority, that we don't skip on this. Everything else we can put aside, but when it comes to the majlis, we take it seriously. Which is why then the etiquette of being in the majlis has to be different. While we want our centers and our community centers to be a safe place for our children to be free, there has to be a time where we teach them that being here is not just about having fun, it's about the importance of the experience. Which is why when you can, and you see your child beginning to understand, sit them with you and sit them at your knee. Sit them right in front of you. Not as a punishment, but to teach them the akhlaq and the etiquette of the majlis. Because let me tell you something, in a country and a culture where emotion is considered a negative quality, even though they're designing us to be very emotional, and that's another conversation, but the expression of sorrow, grief, crying is considered a bad quality. You want to teach your child to love Imam Hussain, to cry for Imam Hussain? He needs to see you express that love. She needs to see you cry for the Imam. That's what teaches them that it's okay. You're the first role model in your house. You want your child to learn to love Abu Abdullah? You love Abu Abdullah. Sit them with you. Let them see that experience. Make them a part of teaching them the etiquette that when it's this majlis, we sit and we listen, we pay attention. But it doesn't end there. It goes further. Because when the majlis finishes and you sit in the car, you go home, now begins the real class. Ask your child, what did you listen to today? What did you hear? Tell me 3 points you understood. Start seeing how your child, what do they pick up on? What do they find interesting? What are they paying attention to? There's a few things that happens when a parent engages with a child after an experience like this. One, it insists that the child who's present has to be listening because he knows that when I get in the car, mom and dad are going to ask me. They're going to ask me to explain something, so I have to listen to something. I have to catch something. Two, it teaches you about your child's personality. What makes them click? What did they engage with? What remained with them after the fact? When we raise a child, we imagine we know what they're thinking, but we really don't. We don't really know what makes them work until they can express themselves. So teach your child to express themselves. Teach them to share something with you, to see what's their personality. Do they remember the masa'ib? Do they remember the ayat? Do they remember the hadith? Do they remember the story? What do they remember? What engages them? And then third, it builds a connection of talking about something other than responsibilities. One of the respected ulama pointed to a study that was done in a psychiatric journal, who he said that on average a parent speaks to their child about 7 minutes a day. And most of that conversation is, did you do this? Did you clean this up? Did you put this away? It's time to go here. It's time to come from here. And this is the extent of our conversation with our next generation, because they're busy in their schedule. We're busy in our schedule. It's usually commands that we're issuing to our children, and they're following those commands. Or we're yelling at them. Not as much, but we do that as well too. This changes that tone of the relationship between the parent and child. That now we're actually having a conversation, we're having a discussion. And thus it becomes an important element of taking and extracting the benefit, that this is one of the important elements that we have in this country to make sure that our children stay on the religion of Islam going forward. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our topic of discussion over the next few nights intends to remain upon the relationship between Imam Hussain and Imam Zaman, our third Imam and our 12th Imam. And we mentioned that these two share a unique relationship, where we see that the call of our 12th Imam is, Ya li tharat al-Hussain, oh, for the revenge of Hussain. These two are connected. But before we get into, for example, how and where we see the similitudes and what's the connection between this Imam's uprising and the 12th Imam's dawr, a fundamental question is, why do we even need this? Why do we need to talk about the events of Karbala? Why did the events of Karbala have to take place? Why is it a part of our history, and why does it continue on with us? And the same question, why do we need an Imam of our time? Why do we need to have somebody that is promised to bring and to change and to bring about status and bring about this change in this world? Isn't the world an okay place? These types of questions that come up is that, okay, fine, we're promoting this ideology, we're promoting this concept, but do we understand why it's necessary? What are the impacts of it? The first point to understand is that why do we even need to have a hujjah of Allah on this earth? Why does an Imam have to be present? Why does it have to be that there is someone here that represents Allah? So we'll have 3 parts to our conversation. Why do we need the hujjah of Allah on this earth? Why did we need the sacrifice of Karbala and Imam Hussain? And why do we need the dawr of our Imam? And these 3 points, inshallah, we'll cover tonight with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we look at the nizam, the order that Allah created on this earth, the first thing that Allah creates when He talks about Adam and the lineage of Adam on this earth, He makes the statement, He tells us Himself, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Come on, wake up. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah in the Quran explains, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ. أحسنتم. The women are awake. Yallah. Rijal. Allah says, I will appoint my authority on this earth before He even brings about the creation of man on this earth. The significance of this is to say that Allah has taught us and said that in this earth, for humanity to be present, there has to be a connection with Allah. Why can't we connect with Allah directly? When we study the philosophy of Tawheed and the attributes of Allah, we come to a conclusion that Allah is what we refer to as absolute and man is what we refer to as relative. Let me explain. A relative being is that being that requires something to exist. It needs resources, it needs a cause for the effect to be present. In the sense that we say that, for example, man is something that exists in the plane of time, space, and matter. That man, when he possesses all three of these qualities, he comes into existence. For something to exist in time, space, and matter, it's relative, that there had to be some time where he was present and some time where he was absent, some space where he is and some space where he isn't, and something that he is made of and something that he isn't made of. And this becomes a relative being because all three of these items have to be present for him to exist. We say that for Allah then, Allah has to be absolute. He has to exist outside of the space, time, and material continuum. Because if he exists in space, time, and material, then that means that Allah is like us. He needs space, he needs time, and he needs material that he is consistent of. When Allah is outside of this continuum of space, time, and material, He is absolute because He requires nothing to exist and He is always in a state of existence. Now when Allah brings into existence and He creates insan, there is no connection between insan, who is relative, and Allah, who is absolute. And there is no way for man to know Allah unless Allah Himself introduces Himself to insan. Allah is the one who then brings about that connection and establishes the connection. Because in the absence of that connection, there's no way for the relative to reach the absolute. So Allah establishes the fundamental, and He says that if I'm going to put man on this earth, there will be a hidayah and a connection. There will be a khalifa and authority who will be the connection between the heavens and the earth. And this is how we refer to our anbiya and our imams. That they are that holy connection between as-sama'i wal-ard. That between Allah and humanity. That this is that aspect of knowing who is Allah and how to connect with Him. Hence the aspect of an imam existing or an authority of Allah existing on this earth at all points in time becomes one of the fundamentals of reality, that if Allah created us, He created us to know Him, to connect with Him, and to connect with Him we have to have someone who teaches us this path. Which is why Allah in the Quran as well mentions in the verse that we began our discussion with from Surah Ali Imran, verse number 104, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Allah mentions in the Quran and says, from amongst you there should always be a party who invites to good and enjoins what is right and forbids what is wrong, and these are they that shall be successful. This explanation Allah is telling us in the Quran, that there has to be a series of connection, that there is one who will always be present that will teach you the righteous path that Allah wants you to go down. This is why we always need an imam, and specifically after the coming of our holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that once this message is given, Allah now needs to ensure that this message will remain in humanity and will not be corrupted. Which is why نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّ لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. That we are the ones who sent down this reminder, and we are the ones who will protect it and ensure that it remains true and absolute. Hence one of the responsibilities of the authority of Allah is to ensure that the message and the path of guidance to Allah and to connect with Allah is always uncorrupted and pure. And this was one of the responsibilities of each of the imams, to ensure that that message stays protected. Another of these responsibilities, and we'll mention this briefly as well too, is the completion of the message of Islam. What do you mean? Message was completed. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Allah says, today I have completed and perfected for you your religion. The religion at that moment was completed and perfected in theory. The practical has yet to be established. We'll discuss what this means in a few minutes as well too. So we see three elements that we need to address and understand of why there is a need for a hujjah, an authority of Allah, to be present on this earth. One, to maintain the connection between Allah and humanity. Because without a connection that Allah establishes, there is no way for man to return to Allah. Because Allah is absolute and we are relative. We cannot comprehend the absolute. Anything that you can think of exists within time, space, and material. Allah exists outside of this realm. Therefore, we can't reach Him. The second point is to protect and ensure that this message stays preserved. And the third point, to complete the message that Allah has given to us. Now to understand, why do we need the revolution of Karbala? And why do we need the coming of Imam Zaman? The second of our points, why do we need the revolution of Karbala? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When it comes to the event of Karbala, there are a few points to pay, there's many points to pay attention to, but one of the significant points to pay attention to is this debate that sometimes happens in people who don't understand what is an Imam. That they argue and they say that Karbala is a reflection of the personality of Abu Abdullah. Meaning what? Some who look at biographies in history, they look at biographies in history and they say, these two sons of Rasulullah, as you referred to, Sayyida Shabab Ahl al-Jannah, the two masters of heaven, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain, that their actions are based on their personality. That Imam Hassan was a peace-loving person, therefore he created peace and created a treaty in his life. And Imam Hussain, na'uzubillah, was a aggressive person, a very war-preferring person, and therefore he made war. This is not true. This is not how an Imam operates. An Imam does not operate on the basis of his personality. He operates on the basis of reality to ensure that the message of Islam persists. Which is why, when we look at A'immah alayhimus salam, if we took them and moved their places and put, for example, our sixth Imam in the place of the third Imam and our third Imam in the place of the sixth Imam, the actions would have been the same. That had Imam Sadiq been in the time of Imam Hussain, he would have stood up against Yazid. And had Imam Hussain been in the time of Imam Sadiq, he would have gone and propagated and taught and given all of us the lessons of Islam to establish Madhab Ja'fari that we possess today. An Imam does what the time requires to ensure that the message of Islam persists. So when we look at, for example, the events of Karbala, it's not a question of personality, of the fact that this was the decision of the Imam because his personality reflected. That's something limited people like us do. That we deal with a situation, we deal with a conflict, a problem in our time based upon what our capacity is. If I can, for example, be peaceful in a situation, I'm peaceful. But if my personality doesn't allow it, if I'm someone who becomes angry very quickly, then, for example, I may say, it was not my fault, I had no choice, this was my character. But an Imam is not someone whose character overrides the hikmat and the need of the time. The need of the time is what the Imam looks at when he establishes these fundamentals and rules. There's a point that goes further into this. Are you guys okay? Are we okay? Everybody's awake? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A point that goes further into this aspect of elaborating the idea that the Imam does what the need of the time is and not what his desire is that sometimes when we study the biography of the Imams, there's multiple ways of studying the biography of the Imam. And I'm going on a tangent here. We'll come back to our topic in a minute. Sometimes you look at the biography of the Imam, similar to, for example, how we read the Quran. The Quran, when we read, for example, the tafsir or the explanations of the verses, we read it chronologically. We read it from beginning to end. We begin with Bismillah in Surah Fatiha and we end with Nas at the end, and we read everything in the entire process. Another way that we take a look at it, as we look at it by mawdu', by subject. And what you do is you, instead of taking a look at, for example, a verse of Tawheed when it comes up, a verse of, for example, Nabuwwat when it comes up, you take out all of the verses on one subject and you look at them simultaneously at the same time to see the connection on the subject and how Allah elaborates the subject. Similarly, in the lifespan of the Imams, there's more than one way to study the lifespan and the biography of the Imam, and sometimes to look at it by subject. And when you look at it by subject, the initial reaction is you see conflict. Why? Take a look and see. For example, we see Imam Hassan making peace. We see Imam Hussain standing up against the Khalifa of the time. We see, for example, Imam Sadiq and Imam Baqir staying quiet. We see Imam Rada becoming the successor of the Khalifa. If we were looking at the concept of political engagement in that one window alone, we would say that these Imams, na'uzubillah, have no continuity amongst themselves. But rather what we have to take a look at when we look at the subject of the Imam is see that each of the Imams is teaching how to deal with the situation when it specifically applies in this particular problem. That if the Khalifa behaves like the one in the time of Imam Hassan, The right action is to make peace. If it behaves like the time of Imam Hussain, then the necessity is to enact and stand up against him. And at other times, it is better to stay silent to preserve the message of Islam. And at other times, it is a necessity to preserve the message of Islam, to even work with the Khalifa if you're forced to. And what are the conditions that you should behave in? So when we take a look at these actions of these Imams, don't look at them as a conflict of personality. Rather, look at them exactly as they are intended, as a series of lessons to educate us for whatever time you exist in, whatever conflict you're facing. The Imams in their biography create one continuous narrative that as the situation changes, how should your reaction change to deal with it? Understanding this principle, now when we look at the waqia of Karbala, when we look at the event of Karbala, and why did we need Karbala to exist, we understand that the persistence of the message of Islam required that this event take place. And we're not going to encompass the why of Karbala and the hikmat of Karbala entirely in one night, but there are some fundamentals that required this event to take place and why we can't forget it. One of these was, as we say, the preservation of the religion Islam. And this is a common concept, but how? How is this the preservation of the religion of Islam? How did this event ensure that Islam persists till today? One of the explanations, and I tell you that the beauty of the actions that Allah inspires through the Imam is such that every angle that you look at it from, it is a complete and perfect action. But one aspect is that the event of Karbala separated religious authority from the Khilafat. Let me explain what I mean by that. When we look at the system of Khilafat that initiates after the death of our Prophet, us who establish the authority of the Ahlul Bayt recognize and understand that Khilafat is a kingship. It is nothing more. It has no spiritual value in it. It has no religious authority in it. It is a kingship that was usurped and taken as a kingship from the hands of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Well, what do the Muslimin believe? They believe that this was something inspired by Allah. That Allah gave them this authority. And the Khalifa, an and ma, as soon as he stole that authority, took two positions. One as the king, and two as a religious authority. And people went to the Khalifa to ask him religious questions. And they went to the Khalifa for political issues. The Khalifa issued war, and at the same time he launched edicts of Islam. Which is why we take a look and we see things like, for example, Salat al-Tarawih. Where did that come from? That came from the Khulafa. But if we recognize that that man was a king, we would say that he has no authority to tell us what to do in our religion. What we saw was after the shahadat of our Prophet, this khilafat in the minds of awam al-Muslimin was both religious authority and kingship until it comes to the event of Karbala. See, until this point in time, the khulafa, though we may know their biographies and we know their history, let's look at it from a commoner's perspective. That this person claims that they are endowed, that they came upon this authority because Allah inspired them to take it. So therefore, whatever they do is from Allah, and it's okay. Imam Hussain comes and he separates this khilafat from religious authority by showing the disparity of the character of the Khalifa. By showing that this Khalifa doesn't care about Islam at all, he only cares about power. Which is why when he says, مِثْلِ لَا يُبَايِعْ مِثْلُهُ, he's establishing and saying that someone who has piety and character does not submit and make an authority over himself someone like that. This man has no religious authority. Why should I submit to him? Why should it be okay? The event of Karbala and the depravity of the actions that takes place in Karbala, the excessiveness of force that's used against the Prophet's grandson, that the Prophet himself made his love a part of the faith of Islam. There is no Muslim who disagrees that the Prophet made the love of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain as a part of Islam. Why? We have narrations from our Prophet himself where they say we would be walking with Rasulullah in the streets of Medina and he would see Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain playing in the streets. Rasulullah would leave his companions and go to show affection and love to Imam Hussain in the streets of Medina. And the companions would then ask, Ya Rasulullah, did you go to this child because you love him or because Allah commanded you? The significance of this question in the time of the Prophet was that we already knew مَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْحَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. That our Prophet doesn't do anything of his own accord. Rather, whatever he does is that it's revelation that is sent down to him that he then enacts. So the Sahaba in the life of the Prophet would question, Ya Rasulullah, we see you leave. You are the head of the state. You are the head of a government. You are the head of a religion. You are the receiver of wahi. You are of excellence in knowledge and understanding of every affair that exists in the world. Yet we see you leave everything and go to Hussain ibn Ali in the streets of Medina. Why? And Rasulullah would explain and say that I have been commanded by Allah. That's why I love these children. And he would explain and he would say, Hassan wa Hussain, imaman hadhihi al-ummah, law qa'ada aw qama. That these two sons of mine are the imams and leaders of this ummah, whether they sit, meaning make peace, or stand and fight. That whatever action they perform is exactly what Allah desires from them, and they are the divinely appointed authority over this place. So meaning that every Muslim accepted that Imam Hussain has a special place in the religion of Islam that was given to him by Allah, that was demonstrated by Rasulullah. Now comes someone who claims worldly authority and challenges this grandson of the Prophet, and not just challenges him, oppresses him, imprisons his women and children, kills him and desecrates his body, all which is against the rules of Islam. After this moment in history, it's clear and understood that whoever sits in that chair of Khilafat is a king, not a representative of Islam, because he does not act according to the rules of Islam. This event that Imam takes and establishes as a fundamental, lays out, and look at every Khalifa after this who puts his religious judges separate from himself in his court. The Khalifa no longer is a religious judge after this. He says, no, I need authorities in religion to represent the faith. I am simply the judge over these issues, or I am simply the authority over these people. But the religious authority has to come from someone else, meaning the Khalifa's position himself is no longer a religious authority. Which is why we see that, for example, in the Dawr of Imam Jawad, the Dawr of Imam Rada, we see that the Khulafa, when they would be faced with a difficult question, they would call and they would bring in the different schools of thought, and then they would revert to the Imam to then teach them and give them the answer. This was part of the reason of the shahadat of some of our A'immah alayhimus salam. That it was visibly seen that this Imam, not only was he someone who was a formidable personality and was someone who was excellent in every aspect of character, but also had complete knowledge of the religion of Islam, such that people would then question that, why are we following this guy if we have this son of Zahra amongst us? And then this would cause the Khalifa of the time to then perpetrate the shahadat of the Imam, because they couldn't overcome the character of the Ahlul Bayt. This impact of Karbala, of separating the religious authority from the governmental authority, is one of the most important turning points in the history of Islam. When we say that Imam Hussain saved the religion of Islam, this separation is one of the most important ways. Now imagine, had the Imam not stood up against the Khalifa, who was openly a drunkard, an abuser, a gambler, who performed every illicit deed that Allah has forbidden, and the people at that time who took their religion from the Khalifa, appointed this man as a Khalifa without question, then he would have disrupted and corrupted the entire religion, because they would have said, well, whatever the Khalifa does is our religion, so now that he drinks, then it's okay for us to drink. Na'udhu billah. Now that he sins, it is okay for us to sin. But seeing that this Khalifa, who has taken authority, could be so vile and degraded that he kills and abuses one who we know his piety is true, we know his status, they said, no, this is not the religious authority anymore. And in this way, the Imam saves the religion of Islam. So why do we need it? One, we know the historical fact of why we need this. Then today, the perfection of the actions executed by Imam Hussain insist that his message was nothing except for the sake of Islam. One of the most important fundamentals to know that his cause was for the sake of Islam and not motivated by personal interest is the actions of Imam Hassan in his life. You guys okay? You all right? I'm going to take another tangent. You guys okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is a subject that, given the opportunity, I can talk about, but we have something to cover, but one point, right? never underestimate the impact of what Imam Hassan did in his life by making that treaty with Muawiyah Maloon. Because those conditions of that treaty that Imam made were to say that there is no more cursing of Amir al-Mu'mineen, which was broken, that those who supported Imam Ali and Imam Hassan should not be abused, that was broken, that those who supported the Ahlul Bayt should receive their stipends, that was broken, and that Muawiyah had no right to appoint a Khalifa after him. That when Muawiyah dies, the Khilafat returns to Imam Hassan, and if Imam Hassan is Shaheed, Imam Hussain. This was the treaty that was signed by Imam Hassan, and that he approved this treaty. The consequence of this treaty was that when Muawiyah dies and Mal'un Yazid stands up to take the Khilafat, there is no single justification under any grounds that Yazid Mal'un should have ever been the Khalifa. And the fact that he fights for it and stands up for it, Imam Hussain standing up against him, no one can question that Imam Hussain was asking for power or was trying to fight for power. Rather, he stood up for haqq. He stood up for justice, that this was agreed and this is the status of the Muslimin. And that it is my right that I am standing up, that this one does not deserve this position because his father and the Ummah agreed that this is the status that will happen. That justification that we can say that Imam Hussain was not hungry for power is given to him by the treaty of Imam Hassan. Now remember something, the Khilafat of Mal'un Muawiyah lasted 20 years. After 10 years of the Khilafat of Muawiyah, he assassinates Imam Hassan. As soon as Imam Hassan assassinated, the people of Kufa, the others, they all stood up and they called to Imam Hussain and they said, you didn't make this treaty, fight against Muawiyah, we'll support you. And Imam Hussain would clearly simply reply, he says, no, there is a treaty between me and him, I will not rise at this time. Because we made a treaty and I stand by it. Which is why the imamat of Imam Hussain is this 10 years, then Mal'un Muawiyah dies, and at that moment we see the inflection point where Muawiyah instills his son illegally. And Imam Hussain refuses to accept it and then seeks his right. There's no political process here of him wanting power and fighting against power for the sake of power. Rather, he is standing up for justice. This is why the lesson of justice, and inshallah we'll talk more about this tomorrow night, is one of the cornerstones of why we repeat this discussion every year. Why we review and discuss this event every time. Which brings us to the third section of tonight's conversation, which is why do we need then the authority of the 12th Imam, Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. So, a second and louder, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The same way that we can see the impact and the benefits of what Imam Hussein's revolution did, the question is applied to what is the significance and necessity of the revolution of Imam Zaman? Why do we need this Imam to exist? And again, this is not something that is answered in one point, but there are a variety of different topics, and we said the actions of Allah always bear absolute hikmah, and so does the actions of the Imam. One of these actions that we say is avenging the injustice against Imam Hussain, is the role of the 12th Imam, and we mentioned this yesterday. And one of the important aspects that the Imam fulfills is avenging the murder of Imam Hussain. Now the question comes that, for example, who will it be avenged against? Right? The people who are present, the supporters who were there, those who benefited, they've long gone from this earth. They're not present anymore. There are a few different opinions about this. One opinion comes to the point and simply says that anyone who prefers the injustice of the self over the truth of justice for humanity will be considered those who supported the enemies of Imam Hussain. Anyone who has self-interest and does actions in self-interest instead of for the goodness of society is from amongst those who were pleased with the actions of the Banu Umayyah in that day and age. Another explanation that comes and says that though today the message of Imam Hussain has been forgotten by humanity as a whole, and humanity as a whole, very few people remember and commemorate in comparison to the collective. That however many million we are in this earth is not enough in comparison to the billions that are present on this earth of humanity who is ignorant of this event. But that a time will come where this message of Imam Hussain will again be raised by those who call for justice across humanity, and humanity again will be split in the cause of either agreeing with the message of Imam Hussain or disagreeing with the message of Imam Hussain. And therefore, the people who will be the enemies of Ahlul Bayt by agreeing and being satisfied with the actions that were performed against Imam Hussain will again rise, and then therefore the justice will need to be established against those who stand against the Imam of the time. This is one explanation of the need. The second point that we mention is the process of continuing and fulfilling the prophecies of the Quran on this earth. We mentioned in the beginning that one of the responsibilities of the Hujjah on this earth is to present and to complete the message of Allah. And we said that the religion in theory was completed, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinukum. That today I have perfected for your faith. That on this day, the religion was perfected in theory, but there is something missing in practical from its application. For example, there are verses of the Quran where Allah has made a promise and a commitment, but that commitment hasn't been fulfilled yet. وَأَرْسَلَ رَسُولُهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. This verse in the Quran, in Surah At-Tawbah, verse number 33, in Surah As-Saf it's mentioned as well, and there's a variation of this verse mentioned as well too, in which Allah says that He is the one who sent down His Prophet with righteousness and justice, لِيُظْهِرَ, so that it overcomes all of the other false religions in this earth. وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, though the mushrikeen should dislike this. Allah made a promise in the Quran that this religion will overcome every other religion in this world. Now, amongst the various sects of Islam, there are different opinions about how this will happen. Some came forward and they said, لِيُظْهِرَهُ الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ, that it will overcome the other religions. The fact that it still persists and remains in its pure form, it has been satisfied. Others came and said that this religion will overcome the other religions in this earth, meaning that eventually the population of Muslims will be more than every other group that exists on this earth. And this is where that accusation comes against Muslimin, that they're trying to overpopulate the world and take over. That's not what we're trying to do. The third interpretation of this is to say that لِيُظْهِرَ دِينَهُ عَلَى دِينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, that his faith will overcome all the other faiths, is that there will come a time where this faith will be accepted by all of humanity collectively. And that all of humanity will agree that this is haqq and this is truth and this is justice and this needs to be established. And to do that is what we say that the Imam's dawr is still continuing, that the Imam has the responsibility to fulfill these promises, not prophecies, promises the Quran has made. And amongst them is to make sure that this message reaches every person in every area and everyone accepts it. And we'll talk about how this will happen. A third explanation of this is looking back at the concept that Allah says, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, that I'm going to place my authority on this earth. Meaning that from the initiation of humanity, there was something that Allah wanted humanity to do. There was a way that Allah wanted humanity to behave, and He gave us commands and He gave us punishments. And He said, if you fulfill these, you will be rewarded. If you refuse to fulfill them, you will be punished. And within these commands was not just the rules, for example, for individual life, but also for social life and for community and development and keeping humanity together and the buying and the selling and the systems of governance and the systems of society. All of these guidelines Allah placed in His scriptures and in His guidance to humanity. Khususan when we look at the message of Islam, you can't deny it that Islam is a perfect way of life for not just the individual, but for the collective, for the society. But it was never implemented. We've never seen, and this could be an argument that humanity based on the Day of Judgment, that, Ya Allah, how shall you punish us? You gave us all of these commands, but they were impossible for us to implement. No society could live according to all of these guidelines that you've given us. Allah, to complete His hujjah and authority on humanity, has to establish a time on this earth where life exists exactly as Allah commanded it to, so that we can see what it is that Allah was always guiding us to and we were refusing to follow it. Otherwise we would say it's impossible, mahal, ya Allah. As there are certain theories, they can never be put in practical. Why? Because it exists in a theory. There's no way for it to exist in reality. So Allah has to create and establish a time on this earth that demonstrates and says, oh humanity, if you would have listened to me from the beginning, this is what life on this earth would have been like. This is what you could have achieved and accomplished. This is the peace and comfort in which society could live. So therefore the dawah of the Imam becomes very important to establish that example of what Allah wanted to show. Which is why we have narrations from the Ahl al-Bayt that say when you pray, pray for the dhuhur of the Imam before everything else. Why? Because you've never seen success and satisfaction and happiness on this earth like you will in the time of the Imam. You see, you imagine, right? When I make dua, I should make dua for $1 million. Nah, $1 million isn't anything anymore, Baba. $1 billion. I should make dua for a fancy car. I should make dua for a giant mansion. I should make dua, and we think of every material limited element we can think of. But you know what they say, right? More money, more problems. It doesn't solve the problem. The only solution to the problem in this time is that when that Imam comes and he establishes peace and equity and success for all of humanity, the earth opens up its treasures to the Imam. Knowledge that we have 2 doors of, the other 75 doors of knowledge are open to us with the dhuhur of the Imam. Peace and justice are established on the earth as our Prophet explained. يَمْلَأُ الْأَرْضَ عَدْلًا وَقِسْتًا كَمَا مُلِئَتْ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا. That this earth until the coming of the Imam is filled with oppression and abuse until the Imam comes and fills it with justice and equity. So why the most important dua that we can make, why we need the dawah of this Imam, is to see that, oh Allah, if we did what you promised us, if each of us enacted the values that you taught us, what would this earth look like? What would this world be like? And that there will be no better time for humanity. Which is why, with the bottom of your heart, it should always be the first dua that I make. Allahumma ajjil waliyaka al-faraj. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There is a time on this earth where people could not recognize the Imam and could not recognize the authority of the Imam. And for that oppression against the Imam is why we gather in these nights and we remember the Masa'ib of Abu Abdullah. Today was the 2nd day of Karbala. The 2nd day of the Waqi'ah of Karbala, the 2nd day of Muharram, in which it's narrated that Abu Abdullah with his caravan reached the lands of Karbala. And he called to the people to ask them, what is the name of this land that we have reached to? Some narrations they describe and they say that as Abu Abdullah was riding his horse, a slight sleep overcame him, and in his dream he saw that a piebald dog was tearing at his flesh. Abu Abdullah pauses this caravan, and as his son Akbar approaches, Akbar asks, "Oh father, what happened?" He says, "Oh my son, we have reached a place on this earth where I see that we will face great difficulties and there are trials ahead of us, and that we will be killed unjustly." This young man turns to his father. He says, "Oh father, will we be on the path of haqq?" And his father replies, "Certainly my son, we will be." This young man replies and he says, "Then what have we to worry about death?" Soon we will mention that Abu Abdullah calls out and he says, "Oh Akbar, if you had a son like you, you would know how difficult this is to lose a son like you." Abu Abdullah calls the Banu Asad, who are the tribes that were nearby to this land, and he asks them the name of this land. And some say it's Nainawa, some give other names, until eventually one explains that he says one of the names that we have heard of this land is Karb wa Bala, the land of sorrows and difficulties. And Abu Abdullah says, we have reached the destination that we needed. Abu Abdullah says to the Banu Asad, he says, "I want to purchase this land from you. But I want to put a condition that after my martyrdom, after I leave this world, if you should see my body on this ground here, to bury me in this place." After the men agree and they said, "Whatever you say, Ibn Rasulullah, grandson of the Prophet, whatever you say, we accept." He says, "But I want to speak to the women of your community now as well too." When the women come, The Imam says to him, he says, I have asked your men that if I should be killed in this land, that they should bury me. But if you find that your men are fearful and unable to complete this action, O women of Banu Asad, I ask you to come and to bury me and to put dirt on my body and don't leave me under the open sky. Eventually the women agree to this, but the Imam says, send to me your children. And it says that in this narration, that the Imam says to the children, O children of Banu Asad, if you find that I have been killed on this land and your parents are too afraid to bury me, I want you to take dirt as if you are playing with it and to bury my body in this land and do not leave me uncovered under the open sky in this condition. And the children of Banu Asad agreed to this. Now you imagine that why would this Imam, he has a grown son like Zainul Abidin. He does not speak to Zainul Abidin. Why? Because after the event of Ashura, he knows it will be Zainul Abidin who will be chained to the back of a camel in such a condition that Ali ibn al-Hussain, when he looks upon the body of his father that is not only left in the field of Karbala, that has then been desecrated in the field of Karbala, that has been left under the open sun without any covering, Zainul Abidin would be the one who is tied to the back of a camel. That Sayyidah Zainab says, when I saw my brother in the field of Karbala, and I saw that his body had been desecrated and left under the heat of the open sun, I looked to the remainder of my brother Ali ibn al-Hussain, and I saw him in a condition that as if his soul was about to leave his body. I said to him, "Oh my nephew, why do I see you fighting for your life?" Ali ibn al-Hussain would reply, "Oh aunt, how unfortunate this son who sees his father after his death desecrated in this way and has no way to offer him assistance to bury his own father. Oh aunt, how shall I live on when I am leaving my father in this condition?" It was Ali ibn al-Hussain who 3 days later came back to bury his father. The Banu Asad were there at that time to fulfill their oath that they would assist with the burial. But they saw as they looked at the bodies, they said, "We cannot recognize who is who." Because to recognize someone who has passed, you need to be able to see their face. But there is no head on any of these bodies. In that instance, Ali ibn al-Hussain comes and he offers them guidance to say, "These are my brothers, these are our companions, this is my brother Akbar." But there are two bodies that Imam Zainul Abidin took the responsibility for himself. One was his uncle Abbas, who he buried with his own hands. The other, they said, he came back to the Maktal and began to lift the body of his father. Such was the desecration of Abu Abdullah in this land of Karbala. They describe and say Ali ibn al-Hussain would lift the body from one side. The body had been trampled so much so that his body would begin to fall to the other side. Ali ibn al-Hussain would try to lift his father from the other side, but his body would again come to fall apart. In this difficulty, Ali ibn al-Hussain, in this land of Karbala that Abu Abdullah has reached, calls out and he says, "O Banu Asad, have you no cloth? Have you no palm leaf that I may collect the pieces of my father in this land and bury him in one place?" Such were the difficulties that Abu Abdullah foresaw that he said, "Bury me. Do not leave me under the open sky." But it was them who left him under the open sky out of fear. For 3 days Abu Abdullah remained in the land of Karbala. They describe after the event of Karbala, one of the companions comes to visit Imam Zainul Abidin in Medina. He comes to the house, he finds in the middle of the heat of the sun, in the courtyard of the house of Imam Zainul Abidin, some women are standing under the heat of the sun. The companion imagines, "I shall rebuke the Imam that he makes his servants stand in the courtyard under the sun." He goes and he says, "Yabna Rasulullah, why is it that when I come to your house in the heat of the day, I find that you have women, serving women who stand in the courtyard as opposed to seeking shade?" He says, "O companion, these are not our servants, these are the women of Banu Hashim who have witnessed Abu Abdullah in the field of Karbala, left there under the sun of Karbala, that have sworn from this day they shall never take shade again, while they left their Imam alone in Karbala, that today that they will be the ones who stay under the sun as he was." ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. With these tears in our eyes, ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم 10 times. يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, these tears in our eyes, let them be a source of shifa'ah to forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of this night, by the right of our tears for Aba Abdullah. Fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities, the mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease. Give shifa'ah to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, there are those amongst the mu'mineen who are suffering through difficulty and strife in this time. Give aman and security to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahibul Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahibul Zaman. Entitle us to the ziyarat of Aba Abdullah in this world and the shafa of Aba Abdullah in the hereafter. 1 Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas, لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات مع الصلوات.